Hey everybody, we are back here live once again on YouTube. And unfortunately, yesterday we tried to go live from Chicago, but the Soldier Field press box had a little bit of trouble with what they call the internet. And so we ended up doing a recorded version. So if you missed the post-game reaction from Soldier Field, it is up there on the YouTube page, or of course, as always, on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts and so forth. But we are here again to talk about one of our most disliked games to watch, maybe in the history of our lives watching football. Matthew Coller, Manny Hill, as always. And I was chuckling a little bit just before we went on, Manny, because our friend Jonathan Harrison, who sets up the broadcast and everything else, and I told him what title I was going to use. And the title was going to be, do you feel good about the Vikings win over Chicago, which I changed it to, but it just said, do you feel good about the Vikings? And I thought, when has this ever been? Yes. I think we're going to just get a bunch of people saying, no, no, no. So I changed it to, do you feel good about the Vikings win over Chicago? And I have to say that I still think most people's answer is going to be no. But I would like to get your perspective on this, Manny, because the consensus coming out of the game, I think, from the reporters who covered it was, woof, not convinced. My mind isn't changed. You're the same team as you were, but you won somehow by 6 points because whoever Bajent is why, because he turned the ball over twice. Do you feel differently? Can you talk me into feeling any differently about that game other than, okay?
No, I can't. I mean, that was oh man, that was bad yesterday. That was some of the worst football I've ever watched, and at least in a really long time. And it's frustrating because at some point you have to look at what the Vikings have and what the Bears have, and where the two teams are, and you have to think like, even without Justin Jefferson, the Vikings should have been able to go into Chicago. I mean, all of the history of Soldier Field being kind of a house of horrors historically for the Vikings, like, yeah, all of that stuff aside, like the Vikings should have gone in and took care of business and dominated that game. The Bears are not good. They're still a ways away, I think, from contending. They're they don't. I don't think they know who their quarterback is going to be next year because it ain't going to be Justin Fields. I can tell you that right now. He's bad. He's bad. I'm just ready to like completely write off Justin Fields at this point. I'm just not sold. That was not good. And then I don't even understand, like, where did Tyson Bagent come from? I'd never heard of him. How is he the number 2 quarterback for the Chicago Bears going into yesterday's game? How did that happen? I don't even know what school he went to. Never heard of him up until he came into the game yesterday. That was just really, really bad football, and my eyes hurt for having watched that entire game yesterday.
He went to Shepherd University, which, no disrespect to anybody who graduated from Shepherd University. I went to the State University of Brockport, which no one has ever heard of either. So I relate to people like this. Like, oh, yeah. Everybody in the media industry went to Northwestern, Missouri, Syracuse. And here's me. Oh, where'd you go to college? University of Brockport. It doesn't matter. Whatever. You never heard of it. That's how this Bajent guy is. Like, oh yeah, where'd you go? Like Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Shepherd. What? Who? Okay. And the funny part was that he had a chance to win, and he probably should have. He's got a first down, he's set up, and even the fact that DJ Moore is probably the right read on that play. And if the guy didn't go to Shepherd University and had a good enough arm to throw it up over DJ Moore, he catches a touchdown, and we're talking about an iconic loss at Soldier Field. It does bring up, though, a comment here from Carl, who says the last time I felt good about the Vikings was with Favre beat the tar out of Dallas. He sure did, to go to New Orleans in the playoffs there. When are the times that Vikings fans recently have felt good about the Vikings? Because I don't think that that is truly the last good time. Would it be here's one I would say when they signed Kirk Cousins would be one. The day they signed Kirk Cousins, I think a lot of Vikings fans understood why they were moving on from Case Keenum because it was kind of a one-year wonder type of thing. And the idea made sense. Now, there was maybe some debates that we were involved in with Vikings fans at the time that people still haven't let go, and as it pertains to me in this show, about not thinking that was a great idea. But, you know, I get it why they did it because they had such a great football team. And that day when they signed Kirk Cousins might be the last time, potentially beating the New Orleans Saints. That was a great day for them and going out to San Francisco with a chance. And I thought they had a chance going out to San Francisco to win that game, maybe like a 60-40, and they did not. The Buffalo game, like there have been times over the last 5, 6 years that I think there was plenty of reason to feel good about the Vikings. It's just not enough times, I think. Am I missing some there, Manny?
Well, I'll even go back the year before they signed Kirk Cousins. Even before the Minneapolis Miracle win over the Saints. But you remember this week 1 against the Saints in 2017, where Sam Bradford comes in and just lights up the Saints, throws for over 300 yards. He looks fantastic. The offense is clicking. Dalvin Cook is a rookie making his pro debut, and he's kind of dazzling the fans. And the defense looks fantastic against Drew Brees and the Saints. I think that was a time too where there was like legitimate people were like, oh yeah, this team, Bradford's got a whole year under his belt with the Vikings and this system. Yeah, this team is ready to go. And who knows how that season would have turned out if Sam would have been able to stay healthy instead of it being Case Keenum. But yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to go back, outside of the examples that we've given, you'd have to go back, I think, quite a few years. Maybe you go back to 2009 when Favre went into Green Bay and beat the Packers. I think there was still a lot of excitement about that as well because you beat a division rival. Favre gets kind of his second revenge win over the Packers that year, and I think they had moved to like 6-0 at that point, and were probably viewed as the best team in the NFC at that point. Them and the Saints. Um, yeah, man. Otherwise, yeah, you're going back quite a few years to find a time where I think people felt really, really good about the club.
I can think of a few more in 2017. One would be when they beat the Rams, when the Rams came here and they
Yeah.
kind of beat down that number one offense that finished, I believe, number one in the entire NFL. And then here's another moment where Vikings fans probably felt great. And of course, as so often happens, got kicked in the teeth right after this. But when Matt Ryan floats a pass to Julio Jones in the end zone against the Philadelphia Eagles, and Julio mistimes his jump, can't come down with the ball, and the Eagles win that game with Nick Foles. The thought was certainly that going to Philly to play Nick Foles was advantageous as opposed to playing Matt Ryan and a team that had been to the Super Bowl the year before. Now, that was probably my opinion and a terrible opinion, as it turned out to be a truly awful, terrible opinion. I underestimated what it's like to go to Philly, for one, because that was my second year as a reporter covering the Vikings beat. So traveling with the team when I was in Buffalo before, I didn't travel with the Bills or things like that. So I had never been to Philly before. And after I saw it, now I understand it. Why? And I looked at the numbers in this and for an article for week 2 that Philly's defense is way better in Philly than they are away, which most defenses are by some margin. That defense is way more nasty, especially when it comes to pressuring the quarterback, which ultimately led to the Case interception and so forth. Their defense is way more nasty at Philly, and you can see why with the crowd and their participation in the atmosphere is what you could call it. But when Julio drops that ball, my feeling was, wow, they're going to play the lucky team here, although they have had the Minneapolis Miracle, but they're going to play this sort of lucky team that got away with it. There was a play in the Philly game where Foles throws an interception that bounces off a Falcon right into the hands of an Eagle for a big first down in that game. It's like that was just a stupid lucky win. This team's not even good with Nick Foles. This is great for the Vikings. I arrived at the stadium that day expecting to cover a home Super Bowl, and I think a lot of people also did. But the Cousins era has been so many stops and starts of, hey, maybe, and then, oh, no, no, sorry. There's even last year, they beat Buffalo. Whoa. All right. I'm sure I did the post game podcast and said Super Bowl contender. They have to be at 9-1. Like, you can call them lucky all you want, but you're 9-1 and you just beat a great team. And then immediately kicked in the face by Dallas. Oh, never mind. Sorry, you're far too flawed. That is how, if this goes where we still think it's going, which is like 7-10, 8-9, that's going to define the Kirk Cousins era for me. It certainly wasn't all garbage, but there were way too few moments, including like yesterday. Who can feel good about that? Way too few moments where you just felt good only for a fleeting moment about this team, or you know what I mean, like, right, like way too few moments where you actually felt really good and got to sustain that feeling. It was kind of these little blips and not like a consistent, a lot of great moment after moment throughout this era.
Absolutely. And I think the key word when you look back at the previous 5 years and now this year with the Kirk Cousins era is just a lot of frustration. A lot of just like you feel like this team should be better than what they are. And to your point, they give you a little bit of glimpse of, you know, okay, yeah, right. Yeah, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what this offense is supposed to look like. All right, hey, the defense has got some stops. This is what, Mike Zimmer's defense is supposed to look like. And then it just they just find a way to just suck the life out of you, man. And it is really the definition of this entire era. Even in the season last year, like you mentioned, a season in which they win the division running away, they win 13 games. You get the home playoff game against a Giants team that's not really good. You've got, you're feeling pretty good about the matchup that you have in the playoffs. And then Daniel Jones just comes in and just torches your defense because Ed Donatel is coordinating your defense, and that's why it happened. Yeah, and it really kind of, I think that playoff loss to the Giants last year too really just took the wind completely out of the sails of the entire Kirk Cousins era. I think it's just really like one last sort of like bleep you to the fans, we got you again, in terms of like the football gods, so to speak, telling Vikings fans like, oh, you thought this team was really good? Nope. We're bringing you back to reality. This is the same thing that we've been seeing for the previous handful of years. And so, yeah, it truly defines the era, man. It's really frustrating.
And also more sick irony from that, which is if Brian Flores is the defensive coordinator last year, you are probably talking about beating Daniel Jones in that playoff game. And then, who knows after that, maybe it wouldn't have made a huge difference because you're going out to play San Francisco, or maybe you hurt Brock Purdy and you never know. At what I've seen of Brian Flores' defense is it just makes sense. How they use players makes sense. How they scheme against opposing teams makes sense. Even when they've gotten beaten on it. The only time where I was a little confused was Philadelphia, where there wasn't an adjustment. But then you go, but what adjustment? Like, based on the personnel, they were throwing some bigger personnel out there later in the game, still getting run over. That was, to me, just a huge disadvantage. But even when you looked at the Chargers game, they kept a lot of things in front of them and they almost caused some turnovers, but guys didn't catch the ball when it came their way and things like that. But I understood it, which was to keep everything in front of them and try to make Justin Herbert complete 40 passes, and he just did. Patrick Mahomes had a good day, but not a great day, not an unbelievable day. And then the bad quarterbacks have been abused. So you have to wonder, considering that, if Daniel Jones, being among the bad quarterbacks, would have been abused by that defense. And maybe I was thinking of this today. This is just a total off ramp to what we were talking about, but Josh Metellus is good at football, and they just let him sit there last year. He just sat on the sideline and like ran after punts. Well, Chandon Sullivan played football in front of me, and I don't know why. And he gave up more passes into his coverage than any other nickel corner in the entire NFL. Well, good player, impact player, Josh Metellus, who had one of the plays of the day yesterday, sat there and watched. So not great, not great. Good point, though, going back to when were Vikings fans last happy or feeling good? When Blair Walsh was lining up a 27-yard field goal. Think about going into that. And I've had people say to me that season, a lot of the team thought we can really go on a deep run if you get that field goal because of the way they were playing. The early part of the season, they had that bad loss to San Francisco. It's kind of uneven, and then they get rolling. And then they go to Green Bay, and that defense was good,
Yes.
really good. And
Yep.
they abuse Aaron Rodgers and the Packers down there. Teddy's doing kind of just enough to get a ball to Kyle Rudolph to set them up for that field goal. And then you never get to see any more of the Teddy Bridgewater era in Minnesota after that. But as he's lining up the field goal, there's this, and this is the Charlie Brown effect. And if anybody went to the History Museum to see the Charles Schultz thing, there's a lot of thinking of the Vikings when you're looking at the Peanuts pull the football away. But that ends up happening, and then there's that whole thing. But here's another question off of that. When's the next time Vikings fans will be good? Is it later this year when they make the playoffs because they have come storming back? Seems a tad unlikely, but maybe that's your answer. Is it draft night? Is it the first game of next season when new drafty quarterback plays? Like, do they have to be winning with new drafted quarterback? Like, when is the last time, the next time Vikings fans will feel good about their team?
I think that it's going to be on draft night next spring when the Vikings trade up to get Drake May. That's when I think it's going to be. Now, is that really going to happen? I don't know. We'll see. Who knows? But I think if for the next time for it to actually, happen, for people to be really excited about where the team is at, I think it would be something if they do something like that. If they end up with, like, let's say the 10th or 11th pick in the draft, and they use enough draft capital to move up to like the number 2 or number 3 pick in the draft, and they're able to get a Drake May, or if somebody stupidly passes on Caleb Williams and then he's right there for the taking, and they pull the trigger on that pick, I think you're going to get a lot of really, really excited fans ready to kind of usher in a new era with a new young quarterback that's really highly touted and ready to go. And then you're going to get Justin Jefferson back and all of that stuff. I think it would really, because fans typically, even if you're a team that did not win the Super Bowl or haven't won the Super Bowl in recent years, when you're at that point where you're drafting a new quarterback, like in the first round, especially if it's in like the top 10, fans are always chomping at the bit for that. Even if your team won 2 games the season before, if you're drafting a young quarterback, fans are always feeling really, really good about where you're at and where you're headed. So I think if they do something like that next spring, I think fans will be really pumped and really excited.
So Miles agrees with you on that, says, I just need a new quarterback that would at least represent hope for me that we've got a chance at winning in the future. No matter what they do with the quarterback situation, there will be, if it is trade up for Drake May, which might be impossible if he is the number 1 overall pick. I'll be curious to see if that discussion starts to happen. There is a thing going on with Caleb Williams where he is trying way too hard to be Patrick Mahomes all the time and is
Yeah.
not just dropping back and throwing the ball. And he has as great of raw skill as anybody we've seen in the last 10 years. But the thing about the prospects that were considered generational of my lifetime being Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence are the 3, and Jamarcus Russell, I think, goes in there as well as the guys who are considered generational. Jamarcus Russell just had off-field issues that could not be solved. But the other guys were very much of the they play the complete quarterback game in college like they are NFL quarterbacks. And with Caleb Williams, you're not really seeing that. You are seeing spectacular running throws and runs that he could be an impact player, but it has to give you the slide. And I know where he's coming off his worst game. Peyton Manning threw 4 picks in a game one time. Andrew Luck screwed up Spider 2Y Banana, which went down in history with John Gruden. So it does happen. And he's a college quarterback and he's still a young player. But there's just this like element of why is it all taking so long for him to process where the ball is supposed to go, or why is he trying so hard? And it might be in his head. I got to win the Heisman. I got to make a great play on every play, and I can't just sit back here and take the easy stuff. But either way, even if, whether it's him, whether it's Drake May, whether it's Quinn Ewers, who I'm very interested in because he's got that big Matthew Stafford arm that I think Kevin O'Connell might really like. He can really throw the football. Shadur Sanders, we've talked about. He throws 400 yards and 5 touchdowns the other day, makes one mistake and loses the game because he has the worst defense of all time, but still a tremendous prospect. Draft night is a great answer, but I still believe on draft night there will be a lot of people, no matter what they do in picking the quarterback, who say, this guy's going to be the next Christian Ponder. No matter who it is, no matter what happens, that Ponder thing lingers over people. Why don't you show me him winning the Super Bowl first? Then I'll believe in him. I mean, I got a message from a listener who I appreciate, a guy named Seth, who sent me a DM about this stat that was going around about quarterbacks who had been recently drafted not winning the Super Bowl. And I said, Brady and Mahomes have won all the Super Bowls. So I'd take Tua, I'd take Herbert, I'd take Burrow, I'd take Lawrence, I ran through the whole list and I was just like, you know, those guys winning all the Super Bowls is the problem. But I do think that still is you can still smell it anytime you start to talk about drafting a quarterback. And they're like, what if it's a bust? What if it goes wrong? Then what happens? Then we're screwed forever.
Yeah, well, it's, Dan Marino went to the Super Bowl his second year in the NFL and never went back after that, and played 17 years in the league and is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I don't think the Dolphins have any regrets, because he didn't. I mean, yeah, there's probably some regret that they didn't win another, they didn't get to another Super Bowl with him, but I don't think they regret taking him, obviously, with that pick in '83, because he only got to the one Super Bowl and never went back. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Christian Ponder, I think Vikings fans have to just kind of settle down a little bit. Christian Ponder it was a once, first of all, how many times have the Vikings actually like drafted quarterbacks in the first round? It's not happened very often. And when you talk about quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round that were bad, Christian Ponder is the only one that really comes up. They drafted Dante Culpepper in the first round, and Dante was pretty good, for a handful of years before Randy Moss left, and then he had the gruesome knee injury, and then Dante was never the same after that. Same thing with Teddy. Teddy was pretty damn good. And he was at that point in 2016 where he was going to take that next step. I think a lot of people felt like that he was really going to elevate his game to a new level. And then he got hurt, and he's never been in the same since. It's great that he's still in the league, but he's very clearly has not been the same quarterback post injury than he was beforehand. So the Vikings don't have a long. This is not the Chicago Bears or the Cleveland Browns, where they have this long history of just drafting bad quarterbacks. And some of that stuff, too, I think comes from not only were the quarterbacks not good, but the overall situations with those franchises were not good. There wasn't a lot of infrastructure for the quarterback to be successful. There wasn't a lot of stability, in the front offices of, the Browns for so many years. And I think that really contributed to a lot of those quarterbacks failing that were drafted really high. The Vikings don't really seem to have that. They've always seemed to be a pretty well, overall well-run organization that, treats their players pretty well and is pretty highly regarded around the league in terms of just like how they treat their players and stability in the front office and everything like that. So I don't I do think a lot of fans should just take the Christian Ponder stuff and just launch it into the sun, because you're basically talking about one example of the Vikings taking a quarterback in the first round and it not working out, because that's the only time it's ever really happened if you really think about it.
Right. I mean, they've barely ever done it, and that's
Right.
part of the sample size. And I will never believe that anything has to do with the Jets or the Bears drafting these bust quarterbacks, aside from the simple fact of bad situations a lot of times and bad luck. And okay, a really bad decision drafting Trubisky, but they were not the only people who said that Trubisky was the better quarterback. You go back, look at your favorite draft analyst rankings, you're going to find a lot of them had Mitch Trubisky ahead of Patrick Mahomes. That was not my personal opinion at the time, but I've also been wrong about, quite a few of these before. And even this year, 2 out of the 3 guys look good. Anthony Richardson is hurt, but really looked like he could play. CJ Stroud looks like a GD star. I mean, just
Yes.
whoa. Like, I'm watching some of the highlights from yesterday, and I'm like, these are throws, man, and they're going to Nico Collins. Like, I mean, if you can get another receiver or two and maybe some linemen healthy on that team, that man can throw the football. But I remember hearing during draft time that a lot of teams had the 1, 2, 3 almost equal. And it was all kind of a matter of preference. But Bryce Young looks really bad. He had a couple of decent throws the other day, but looks pretty bad so far. Has the worst team, and we don't know where that's going to go. And so the only thing you could do is throw your dart, take your chance, but you can't win if you don't play. And so that's what they have to do here eventually. And the day that they draft that person, as someone said, it will represent, Miles said, it will represent hope for this team, which I totally agree with. And I also think you're very right about the circumstance that Christian Ponder came into. And then the dude lost confidence, started blaming God, if I remember, and it just went off the rails. What was not the most like hard-nosed type of guy who would just fight through it. And you can destroy confidence in a player pretty easily. Having Justin Jefferson here should work well in favor of that, and also 2 of the best tackles in the league. So they're giving themselves a chance. And which quarterback works out for next year, no idea. But that will be the next day that Vikings fans feel good about themselves, unless Justin Jefferson signs an extension before that day. Then we'll see. I want to talk to you about your top 5 teams. I also want to get to a few comments as well to read. But first, we're going to talk about, Manny. We're going to talk about some pizza. You got
Yeah.
to make Little Caesars the official pizza sponsor of the NFL part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame, 1 hour before NFL games. Get ready for some football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery of their in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices at the tastiest hour before kickoff. Pizza, Manny. And also, our show is presented by Prize Picks, although it has become a big part of the show as well with our weekly Prize Picks segment. And this week, not a good showing from me. Not a good showing at all. In fact, I went 0 for 3. I expected Kirk Cousins and Justin Fields to throw for a lot more yards. I was the wrongest I have ever been, and I missed on that one. I also expected Jordan Addison to have more receiving yards than 54 and a half. Also wrong. We'll get him next week. We'll do that on Wednesday night, I think, or maybe tomorrow, where we go through our prize picks. And the reason I like it so much is that A, it does not cost an arm and a leg. So $10 can, if you are more successful than me, turn into 250 very quickly. All you have to do is pick more or less on yardage totals for somewhere between 2 and 6 players. We usually do 3, but you look at the player more or less, and you could do kickers, you could do touchdowns, you could do a lot of different things. You just pick more or less, and then you're playing. Go to prizepicks.com/purple. Use the code purple to get a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com, code purple, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right. This is good in the comments. I enjoyed this. Hunter said, Is this Matthew's way of saying Caleb Williams is overrated? And then Hezzy answered the question for him, saying Caleb Williams sure has the Josh Allen, I got to make this play gene. That's how I feel. What did you think watching him play terribly? I think Hezzy described it exactly how I feel. I don't question the physical skills at all. I just want to sometimes go, just throw it to somebody easy. This game doesn't have to be as hard as you're making it.
Yeah, that's kind of what it seemed like. And and credit to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman, I think is a really good. Marcus Freeman might not be a great college head coach, but he's a really good defensive mind. And Notre Dame's had a really good defense for a number of years because of him kind of coordinating it. And the guy schemes really well for opposing quarterbacks for a long time. And he did it to Caleb Williams on Saturday. And yeah, it did kind of feel like, especially when USC got down by double digits, it really felt like Caleb was really starting to press and trying to do too much, trying to score 2 touchdowns on one play. Um, yeah, I think it's admirable. I think it shows that he's super competitive and that he wants to win. He's going to do whatever it takes to win. Um, but it does kind of feel like and I don't know if Lincoln Riley's going to do this before the season is over or not, but it does kind of feel like he needs to be pulled aside and say, Caleb, listen, we've got weapons, we've got we've got a good surrounding cast around you, at least offensively. Don't know about that defense, but you know you don't have to do everything. Just be who you are. Don't try to do too much, and just take care of the football. Just don't throw it to the other team. But I think overall, I think Caleb Williams is going to be fine. I'm not super worried about it. It is something that I've noticed though, like where even when they beat Colorado a couple weeks before, and they blew the doors out of Colorado until the very end of the game. Um, it did feel like there were a few times where he was just trying to do a little bit too much when it wasn't really necessary. And that might just be something that has to get kind of coached out of him when he gets to the next level. But I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be terrific. You get him in the right situation, and maybe that's not Chicago. Who knows? I don't know. But you get him in the right situation, and I think he's going to be very successful. And I think the same kind of applies to Drake May too.
I think that he can be successful in Chicago if they still have DJ Moore, which they're going to, because I think DJ Moore is legit and Justin Fields just doesn't know how to find him. They have players. I mean, this guy, Bajent, comes in the game, and aside from the 2 horrific plays, but even again, I mentioned like DJ Moore was open and he got the ball to open receivers. I really think it's that Justin Fields can't see anything and just doesn't know what to do back there. And there's nothing you can do to solve that. Purple Haze says, Penix, baby. Sounds like somebody wants the Penix. No, he was a lot of fun to watch. He, to me, has a lot of the. Doesn't his sidearm release look like someone flipped Phillip Rivers?
Yeah.
Like you're watching Phillip Rivers in a mirror. That's who he reminds me of. The leadership qualities, the total command, the accuracy is out of this world. But yet, like he's flinging it sidearm, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. I don't know. Maybe that's right. I think he is a first round prospect. I mean, that back shoulder throw was extremely legit.
Yeah, it was. I like Michael Penix Jr. Even like watching him at Indiana a few years ago, he was really good. Even in like the COVID year of 2020, Indiana was one of the better teams in the Big Ten that year. And I mean, personally, and mostly because I'm anti Ohio State, I think Indiana should have been able to play in the Big Ten championship game that year, even though they had lost to Ohio State. But there was a whole another set of rules that the Big Ten kind of changed and kind of made it so that Ohio State could still play in the championship game. But anyway, I digress. But he looked really good, and I think the issue with Michael Penix Jr. has just been he's had so many injuries. He's had, I think, 2 ACL injuries, and I think it's really kind of affected his mobility. He's not nearly as mobile as he was, 2-3 years ago when he was playing at Indiana. But that arm is really good, and he's really accurate, and he seems to have some really good intangibles in terms of like leadership. He's very humble, but very driven as well, it seems like. I think if again, he's another one of those guys that if you get him in the right situation, I think he can be really, really successful. Is he going to get drafted in the top 10? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I could see a scenario where if he gets drafted to, you know, a pretty good team that's not, that's like not Carolina or Arizona, the team that's not bad, that might just be looking to, transition to a new quarterback in a couple of years. I think that could be a really good spot for him to go.
I like him more than some of the guys who have been first round picks. I never saw it with Kenny Pickett. Mac Jones, I made the argument for. And if you follow our old friend Chad Graff, he was pointing out that the top two receivers on the Patriots that they were supposed to be their 1 and 1A are ranked 76th and 99th by PFF. So he doesn't have a whole lot to work with there, but I still like Penix more than I liked Mac Jones because I thought he was just throwing to wide open receivers all the time. And Penix has shown that he can fit it in windows. But you're right, the mobility does have to be a factor when we talk about this as well because it's necessary. Tang brings up that it's not just Christian Ponder, it's also Tavares Jackson. That is true. That it was not just one guy came in, didn't work out. It was back to back that did not end up working in their favor, which I think that's where people started to get the fear of young development quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think the thing with T Jack too, because I thought about that too. The thing with Tavares Jackson, though, like he was a second round pick and he was taken at the end of the second round. And so much of Tavares Jackson, I thought was more about some arrogance from Brad Childress of just like, yeah, I can take any quarterback. I can take this guy from this FCS or Division 1 AA school, and I can turn him into Donovan McNabb because that's what I did in Philadelphia. And it just was never really going to happen. And you know, there it wasn't a great offensive system for Tavares Jackson to have success. Didn't have a lot of really good wide receivers. The offensive line was really good. And then, then you got Adrian Peterson. You had a running game, and a defense that was really solid, but he didn't really have anybody to throw to. And so that didn't really help matters either. But I think, again, to me, it's about having a plan of drafting a quarterback in the first round and really developing that guy, giving him, as many weapons as humanly possible, which I think the Vikings would have for the next guy. And I think the next guy will have a lot of success.
There's a lot of interesting comments that I want to continue to get to. You guys are doing really well for yourselves tonight here. Nothing like a 1913 win to spark great conversation from our chat, but that's what's going on. Richard says, if Kwesi does not move players before the deadline, I'm done with him. What is the point of having an analytics GM if he doesn't make significant moves based on the analytics? I think that the whole thing of this last offseason was a significant bunch of moves based on analytics, which was to take a 13-win team and eliminate a bunch of the star players. I think of that as very analytical because it's about projecting the future, not what you just did. But the NFL almost never operates that way. In my past, I've never seen a team do that before, where they won that many games and then said, "Hey, Pro Bowler, Pro Bowler, Pro Bowler. Oh, you want more money? See you later, Delvin Tomlinson. Zadarius Smith, what's that? Cash you're looking for? No, 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 no. We're not finding that here. We're saving that for paying Jefferson, whatever we're going to do in the future with our salary cap." I think of that as a very analytical approach because when you're basing it on what you're projecting for the future and not chasing the past, that is driven by projections. But I like semi agree and also would like to point out that there's politics involved in football. That if you are Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and let's say that the best offer for Daniil Hunter is a third round pick. Now, I think it should be a lot better than that, but he is a true rental. And sometimes with rentals, teams are not willing to give up as much unless they're going to sign the player to an extension. But let's just say that it's not that great of an offer and people are trying to rob Kwesi blind knowing that he's in that position. Would you rather make Brian Flores and Kevin O'Connell very angry at you if the season is not on ice by trading Daniil Hunter for a third, or just not take that draft pick, get the third back, in, a compensatory pick. I'm not sure if he gets one with his dead cap, but let's just assume he does. I don't know. That's a complicated system. You get my point. Like, yes, he should trade away KJ Osborne. But if your head coach is going to hate you because you've done that, what's more important to you? And the other thing too is the ownership plays into this as well. And we used to never talk about that with Rick Spielman, and we realized we should have been talking about that with Rick Spielman only after he was fired. But that matters. If the ownership believes that a 3-5 football team, which they could very well be going into the deadline, has a chance to turn it around. If you watch Derek Carr, you might believe that. If you watch Desmond Ritter, you might believe that. If you watch Denver, if you watch the Raiders, you might believe that. So I totally get what you're saying, that they should do that. They should do it today. But there's more involved than just, yeah, well, they should do it because it's smart. And a lot of times there's battlegrounds to fight for a general manager that are not as simple as just pushing the numbers button and doing the moves.
Hell, they probably should have done it 3 years ago during the COVID year when he started out 1-5. Like, let's be honest, they probably should have started selling off players then. Yeah, I'm with you. It is a very complicated situation, and you know the way that the game is viewed through the eyes of ownership, which ultimately they are the ones that make the ultimate decisions on. They are the ones that that really kind of decide everything going forward, and they determine like where this team is at, even if it might be a flawed view because they're not as in tune with the football-y things that go on with an organization. They're the ones that sign the checks, and you have to kind of, if they want to hang on and keep trying, you kind of have to. If you're the GM, you kind of have to do it. Otherwise, sometimes they might just find somebody who will. So it does get a little bit complicated, and I think it kind of goes back to something that you've brought up a few times in the last. I think even starting back with the off season, is that sometimes the moves that you make are almost kind of forced upon you when you kind of realize, yeah, it's clear and obvious that it's not going anywhere. Now you and I can look at this team right now and say, yeah, it's time to start thinking about the future, finding a new quarterback, letting go some really expensive players that maybe are not a part of your long-term future, moving on from some of those guys, trying to get as much back as you can. you know, People like you and I might be able to see that. There's probably a lot of fans, I think, that can see that. But if the owners don't see that, if they think that there's still a chance that this team can make the playoffs with a veteran quarterback, and especially now, like, we Justin Jefferson hasn't been ruled out for the season. There's still a chance he could come back later in the year. And if there's still that chance, you know, maybe Ziggy and Mark Wilf are looking at, hey, we're only a couple games under 500. We still got a chance. We're maybe only a game out of a playoff spot, or that last playoff spot. We get Justin Jefferson back later in the season. Hey, let's make a push. Let's keep trying to go and keep trying to make a run here. And Kwesi might be looking at that and saying, no, this is not really it. But he's got to go along with that, and he's going to do what he needs to do to trying to keep the team on a push to try and make the postseason.
So, and looking at that possibility, when you look at who's at the bottom, and there's really no reason, in my opinion, to have a seventh playoff team, but it is what it is. The seventh playoff spot right now belongs to the Los Angeles Rams. The Washington Commanders are next, then the Falcons and the Saints. These teams are all 3-3. The Packers are 2-3. The Vikings are 2-4. It's all those teams. So Rams, Commanders, Falcons, Saints, Packers, Vikings. Can you beat out all of those teams for that spot? That means nobody else except for you gets hot because they have a lead on you already. It's not a huge lead, but it's still a lead. And how that play, like even if you beat out Green Bay, does somebody else get hot? Does Ritter get it together? Do the Commanders still keep finding a way? The Rams make the most sense here because I think they have a lot of talent still on that team, including a very good quarterback, and they've got to jump on you. You've got to beat a lot of teams for one spot. The odds are not very good that it's you, especially after you scored 19 points and 6 of that is on defense against the Chicago Bears. You got 220 yards against the team that gave up 388 passing to Sam Howell and was one of the worst defenses in the entire NFL going into yesterday. But what you said, though, leads to an interesting discussion that is also happening in the comments. Now, this is from David, says, all the good graces O'Connell earned last year starting to be more fleeting with me. There is a disconnect somewhere. And Tang says, Kevin O'Connell gets a lot of blame for this season too. Slow play calling, terrible game management. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's been terrible. I mean, there's some coaches out there who are still terrible at it. I don't think that's the case. The timeout issue though, fair enough. So there was the one game. And cute play calling too often has gotten on my nerves. Let's see. Leonard, I hope that's pronounced correctly. KOC is not a bad coach, but he's actually good and potentially great? The offense has numbers, but is not efficient and dominating at all. And here's what I'm getting at, Manny, is when your team isn't very good and your quarterback refuses to throw the ball more than about 4 yards on third down, even though the play calls do not call for you to throw to Brandon Powell for 4 yards on third down. You walk a tightrope every week. If you make a bad decision, if you use a bad timeout, if you get too cute with play calling, which does happen sometimes, I guess. Less trick plays this year, thankfully. I can't think of too many that I despised for this year, but you get the point. It's all exposed. And if you're Kevin O'Connell and you're going to take away, Davenport is now out for a while. You're going to take away, Davenport's out. You're going to take away Hunter. You're going to take away Osborne. So now we're talking about who the hell knows who's playing wide receiver after that? Tristan Jackson season, I guess. And is this gonna make your coach look smarter or dumber? Like everybody knows that, right? And this is where you get the headbutting. And you've seen it before, and I've seen it before, where when they're winning, oh, it's best friends forever. But when they're losing, it's, well, if we could only find the person who decided signing Marcus Davenport was a good idea, if we could only decide who traded away all my players, and that's why we're not competing for the playoffs anymore. You see what I mean? Like, this is a thing. This is why tanking sounds great, and I love it, and I wish I could hug it and have it be my best friend. Oh, hey, Detroit's good. How'd that happen? That Magic Land? Oh, no, tanking is how they're good. Anyhow, it is ugly and it's hard, and it's way harder after you win 13 games. So this, like, all of you guys' first impression of Kevin O'Connell is winning 13 games. And now, as it's not held up with a weaker roster and some bad luck, whatever, you go, well, all these things are starting to get exposed. They will only be further exposed if you reduce the talent on this roster, which Kevin O'Connell could not be happy about. And that's where you do get concerned about if you have headbutting with the GM and the coach. We already had that, Manny. It doesn't usually work out great. That's one thing you're trying to avoid.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important for Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell to be on the same page. It's just it's vital to a franchise's long-term success. And I think you go back to last year, to your point about the winning 13 games. We also have to remember the circumstances of how they won those 13 games. They won all of those close games by one score, where a play here or a play there goes differently, and they lose those games. You know what I mean? At least like a handful of those games. If you add, if you take 3 or 4 of those games and flip the script on them in terms of just like 1 or 2 plays, now you're talking about that team being 9-8 and fighting Green Bay and Detroit in week 18 to barely win the division. You know what I mean? And then how are people feeling about it? Then it's like, oh, okay, well, 500-ish team, and you go into 2023 and you have some expectations, but if you look up and you're 2-4, you're still disappointed, but you're not, you still have a more of a stronger idea of like where this team is at in terms of, being able to win enough games. But I think when you go from 13 wins down to now it looks like you might win 6 or 7, then it's like everybody's perception kind of changes, even though I think a lot of the things that we're kind of seeing with this team were things that we saw last year. It was just last year was a better roster, and they found a way to win a lot of the games that they have not been able to win this season. And this is the result you have of them being 2-4, and their 2 wins are against 2 of the worst teams in football.
Yes, they are, and boy, are they bad. Boy, are they bad. But yeah, I mean, that's the interesting dynamic that's going on here. And if they end up not deciding to trade all these players because they've gotten to 3-5 and they feel like they want to make that chase, then I think you can at least understand why, even if we know it to be wrong, because you want to avoid that disagreement and that fighting. And I also thought of another scenario, because once calamity starts to creep in, Manny, the wheels start spinning. We both worked with Judd Zulgad for so long that we know how to spot calamity from like miles out. Like, what if the numbers like one quarterback, but O'Connell likes another one? And there's just, how to rebuild the roster, where to spend the money, who to spend the draft picks on. And do we get, I mean, this is true from Tommy, that Kevin O'Connell has looked very stressed lately. There's no question about it. I mean, he looks, losing is horrible in the NFL. You lose a couple of games in basketball and they're like, look, we're good. It'll be fine. Or they're like, we're tanking, who cares? And everybody's on board. Tanking is just, to me, so much harder in football because every week is the end of the world, and it's extremely hard on head coaches. I shouldn't say it's easy on other teams, but I think that there's so much more of an understanding of where a team stands and what they're going to be. I remember Greg Popovich said this, where he went into last year. He's like, guys, we're probably not making the playoffs. He said this to reporters, like, we're just probably not making the playoffs. I don't know. Look at this team. Like, they get it. But in football, it's like the careers are short. The coaches get fired fast. There's so much more stress. And James says this draft is deep enough that they don't need to tank. To me, trading Danielle Hunter and KJ Osborne is not tanking. So that would be trading Kirk and playing Sean Mannion. But like, it's not tanking. It's simply just doing what you need to do at this moment because you're probably not making the playoffs. Like, that's how it is. That all teams in all sports, when they're not making the playoffs, do. Anyway, this has been a great discussion, but there's a couple other things I wanted to get to with you, Manny. One is, now that we've got essentially a third of the season, more of the third, 6.27% of this. Wait, no, that's not right. Whatever, it doesn't matter. A good chunk of the season through 6 weeks. I want to know your top and bottom 5 teams in the National Football League. And I will admit to everyone that the reason I asked this question was to see if either one of us put the Vikings in their bottom 5. So who do you got?
Okay, I'll go quick. I'll go quick because it's 8:54, and I think we probably want to get out by 9. But my top 5, I got Kansas City, San Francisco, Detroit, Philadelphia, and then like Miami/Buffalo. I'm a little bit more concerned about the Buffalo Bills the last couple of weeks. I know we were bigging them up a couple of weeks ago and at that time they were looking fantastic. They were beating the brakes out of everybody that they were playing after that week 1 loss to the Jets. But the last couple of weeks, they haven't looked that great. They had the loss over in Europe to Jacksonville last week. And then last night, they kind of, grinded out a win against a bad Giants team. I will say the thing that has me still feeling pretty good about Buffalo, though, is that defense. That defense is fantastic. And I think we also know that Josh Allen is still really good. Hasn't looked great the last couple of weeks, but I think overall he's still really good. Stephon Diggs is still really good. And I think that offense will figure things out and they'll be fine. So I got them and Miami kind of in that number 5 spot, sort of, you know, wrestling for that 5 spot. My bottom 5, going from 32 to, I guess it would be 28 if my math serves me right. I got Carolina as the worst team in the league. It's just they're just brutal. It's bad. Bryce Young doesn't look good. The roster is not very good. And now it sounds like Frank Reich is giving up play calling duties out there, which I don't know if that's really going to help matters because Frank, your roster is still terrible. I don't think it's going to change much. I think you're still going to lose a lot of games. So they're the worst team in the league. I got Chicago right behind them. And another team that I've thought about maybe even putting behind Chicago, the New England Patriots, man. It's bad. It's bad. And it might be over for the great Bill Belichick because that roster is terrible. I'm not even sure Mac Jones is that bad. It's just he has nobody to throw to. The defense, I think, can keep them in games. You know, they've got a couple of nice players over there. Matthew Judon is still really good, but overall, that roster is terrible. And then I've got Denver and Arizona rounding out my bottom 5 there. Those are 2 really bad teams as well. Arizona, I don't have Arizona as like the worst team in the league because it kind of feels like they're kind of plucky. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of talent there, but they seem to play really hard. And you know, they're even though they're bad, they're not. It's not. They're not like excruciating to watch. It's like watching Carolina is like an eyesore. It's really bad. Same thing with watching Justin Fields and New England's offense as well. But Arizona's kind of like they're kind of fun. You don't really know who plays for them, but they've kept some games kind of close, and you know they're okay. So that is my top and bottom 5 teams in the league.
So my order, I'll start with the bottom, is slightly different than yours, but I think it's a clear group that does not include the Minnesota Vikings because they've beaten 2 of them, so they can't be there. But I've got the Giants as the worst team in football. I know they just played Buffalo close. I think Buffalo played themselves in that game in a lot of ways. I mean, they fumbled, they turned the ball over, they had penalties, they played a terrible game. But that's the best game of the year by the Giants by far. They've been outscored by 96 points this year, and they don't have their starting quarterback. It's not getting better. It's only getting worse for the Giants. I have New England as the second worst team. That is right. I have New England as worse than the Carolina Panthers because they are just lost. They are just completely lost. They have nothing. And they have a coach that might be worse than the coach in Carolina. And even though their roster is slightly better, but it's still super terrible. They never take the ball away from anybody. They don't get sacks. They don't have any receivers to throw to. It's just awful. They have nothing on that team. Then I have Carolina, Denver, and Chicago. And I actually don't have Arizona in the top 5 because I think Arizona's been, like you said, like more plucky and less calamity, less total dysfunction, and more of like, oh well, you know, they tried, they put together a decent performance against some teams. I know the Giants' only win is against Arizona, but their starting quarterback is out, so I'm going there, and it doesn't look like he's coming back soon. The best team is hard. I still think I'm not going to be prisoner of the moment. San Francisco should have won the game on their worst day. Their absolute worst day. They need a 40-yard field goal to beat one of the best defenses of the last 5 to 7 years. So San Francisco is still the team. Kansas City to me is second, still over Miami because I trust them more because of Mahomes, but that's maybe one of the only reasons. They have about the same point differential. It's pretty close. So I don't know, but Miami is next after that. And then I will go with the Detroit Lions. I think the Detroit Lions belong in this conversation for best
Yeah.
teams in the National Football League. And I struggled. Philadelphia has not been as impressive to me this year. Buffalo has had their struggles. I mean, what's going on right now in the game? I'm not watching, but like Dallas shouldn't just be thrown out of this discussion because they had some bad losses. After that, it gets a little bit tricky to figure out, and Baltimore still has their ups and downs as well. But I think the top 4 of San Francisco, or I guess it is top 5. San Francisco, Kansas City, Miami, Detroit, Buffalo. I think Buffalo still belongs in that discussion. So there you go. Anyway, right at 9 o'clock. We nailed our out. That we can really quit whenever we want. But it gets weird after 9 o'clock. People get punch drunk, and then it gets crazy in the comments. So anyway, Manny, Thursday night, I did have on my list of things to talk about. Thursday night, I want to discuss Jared Goff historical comparables. I
Yeah.
really want to know who you think historically compares to Jared Goff. We will do that Thursday night. I am told as of right now, this moment, Wednesday night at 8:30 when we go live on YouTube, that we will have a special guest on the show at that time. Call it a great reunion of a former NFL player on the show here on Wednesday night. That's the plan as of right now. So make sure you check that out. And Manny, I'll talk to you then, and talk to all you guys probably tomorrow night. I think we're going to go live. So we'll see you all then. That's where you say football, man. You want to say football before we go?
Football.